So one of the major, coping mechanisms, addictions for the last couple of years that I've employed and has become one of my favorites has been language learning. So I kind of want to do a mini commentary series. I don't know why. I think it's just a nice little distraction, and I love talking about languages. So I'm going to be talking about all the different languages I have learned and all the different languages that I plan to learn or am in the middle of learning. And in the background, you're going to have some Call of Duty World of War gameplay, some really old school, old school. I think this game came out in 2008, was it? So 17 years ago, 16 and a half years ago. And I am a little bit of a campy player, but I just love this game, and I hope the gameplay is good enough while I talk about my first language that I learned in life. And it's kind of a silly language to talk about because it was the language of the country I was born in. So Polish. It is a Western Slavic language, most closely, I would say, grammatically related to Czech and Slovak. However, the vocabulary is quite similar to Belarusian and Ukrainian. Even though Belarusian and Ukrainian are Eastern Slavic languages, they have a lot more in common when it comes to lexicality with Polish, and then they're more familiar grammatically with Russian, for example, because that's Russian's the largest Slavic language and the largest East Slavic language. But yeah, so I learned Polish basically, but it's interesting because I learned Polish as a kid, right? And when I left America, I was only in the second grade, so my Polish wasn't exactly the highest level. But I spoke absolutely no English when I came to America. But I very quickly caught on because it was the only language, it was the only language people really spoke in America, at least the part where we lived in. Americans, especially white Americans, tend to remain quite monolinguistic. They learn languages in schools, but they never really learn them to the point of fluency. Not as a criticism, America's very kind of isolated in its own world. But it's just a fact. So I had to learn English to communicate with everybody. And this was kind of a problem because I didn't go back to Poland for about 3 years. That was the first vacation back. And in those 3 years, I basically forgot like half, if not more, of my Polish. I remember there's a very distinct memory when we were driving from the airport with my dad. The first time I came back to Poland, I guess when I was like 10 or 11. And I remember looking at the forest and being like, wait, how the hell do you say forest in Polish? Which is, of course, las, but I didn't remember that. I just did not remember that, and it made me so ashamed of myself. And that shame kind of remained for a few more years because I remember my family in Poland would always make jokes like calling me the American hamburger. Oh, look at our little hamburger from America or something like that. It was kind of irritating at the time, but it didn't help that I was speaking improper Polish, and yeah, it just didn't help. And I felt a lot of shame because my dad, he's very patriotic. He always talks about Ojczyzna, which is like, I guess, the fatherland. And so with that guilt, I basically started, back then we only had Skype, but I started calling my grandparents and my dad, because he was still in Poland. And I kind of had to like re-teach myself Polish through communication with my family. And eventually I did. This was especially accelerated, remember, when my family in Poland started getting iPhones, because Skype back in the day was free, but for certain kind of like calls you had to pay for internationally. When FaceTime came out and they got FaceTime on their iPhone devices, their new iPhone devices, we were able to call basically an infinite amount for free. And that kind of just revolutionized the game, and I was able to talk to my family in Poland almost daily, right? And this just basically re-taught me Polish. But my biggest problem is, I only know Polish from like up to the second grade, and then with communicating with family. So while I'm fluent, I would say, in Polish, I struggle, for example, with slang and the way people talk nowadays. But I still understand most things. I just don't understand a lot of idioms and slang that people use. So anyway, but that's kind of how I learned Polish. It's funny because it's my birth spawn language essentially, but I had to relearn it essentially. So, and again, communication is probably the best way to learn it. And then of course when I was in Poland, I would sometimes read books or watch tons of movies in Polish. So it's all about really exposure to different content, and especially communicating with people if you want to get the pronunciation right. So anyway, that's about it for the first video, how I learned Polish. The next one will be English, of course. And yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna just enjoy doing this little series and giving the background of the different languages I'm talking about and how I learned them. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and zobaczymy się w następnym odcinku. Cześć, pa. See you guys. Bye.